Well, it's kind of the passing of an era, I guess. Our era is passing kind of rapidly right now. We've lost so many in the last few months and few years with the...
He was there when the cameras were off, when the doors closed, when secrets stayed buried. Now, at 87 years old, Bill Anderson is finally ready to open up about Jimmy Capps, the man whose quiet genius helped shape his entire career. For decades, Capps was the unseen force behind the music, a loyal friend who never sought the spotlight. But what truth was too painful for Anderson to speak until now? Stay with us, because what you are about to hear changes everything. The year was 1962, and Nashville's music scene was a vibrant, often chaotic place. Amidst the flickering lights of a modest studio, two young men were about to forge a partnership that would span half a century. Bill Anderson, already known for writing the hit City Lights, was striving to become a performer in his own right. His lyrics were poetic and introspective, but he knew they needed the perfect musical foundation to truly resonate. Jimmy Capps, at just 23, had already established himself as a quiet force among Nashville's session musicians. Raised in Benson, North Carolina, he had a subtle yet unforgettable style. Unlike many guitarists who sought flash and intricate solos, Jimmy was content to be the scaffolding, the strong, unseen support that held the music up. Their first meeting was understated. Anderson walked into the studio and was introduced to the lineup of musicians. Among them, Capps stood, tuning his guitar with a calm focus, a man who knew he belonged there. When they started playing, Anderson immediately noticed a change. The arrangement suddenly felt more alive, anchored by a clean melodic line that lifted the entire song without ever overpowering it. From that day on, Anderson requested Capps for every session he could. He had found in Jimmy what so many other legends would later discover: a musician whose ego never entered the room, and whose playing could slip into a song like a thread through a needle. That session marked the start of a legendary collaboration that would stretch from studio recordings to televised performances and beyond. What made their early days remarkable was their stark difference in personality. Anderson was thoughtful, precise, and a master of words. Capps was warm, dependable, and deeply intuitive. He didn't need to speak to understand each other. A simple glance was often enough. There's a story from an early session where Anderson brought in a new song. He was unsure how to shape. Sitting quietly with his guitar, Capps began to strum a soft, moody progression. It wasn't written down, it was pure instinct. Anderson listened, paused, and said, "That's it, don't change a thing." That moment became a turning point in his early solo career. In interviews years later, Anderson credited Capps with helping him find his musical identity, saying, "I had the words, but Jimmy gave them a home." As Bill Anderson's gentle voice became a staple on country radio, there was always something beneath the lyrics that listeners couldn't quite name: a feeling, a texture, a presence. That presence, more often than not, was the sound of Jimmy Capps's guitar. In a music scene that often favored showmanship, Capps mastered the art of restraint. His finger-picking patterns were never just background noise. They were mood, texture, and soul. This approach was perfectly suited to Anderson's singing style, which leaned into storytelling rather than power. Together, they created a sound that felt like a quiet conversation whispered directly into the listener's heart. One of their most iconic early recordings still became Anderson's signature song. The song's emotional weight came not just from the lyrics or the aching delivery, but from the delicate sigh of the guitar underneath. That record hit #1 and crossed over to the pop charts, forever cementing their sound. While Anderson stood in front of the cameras, Capps remained invisible to most. Yet the song would not have been the same without him. Beyond the studio, their collaboration extended to live performances where their chemistry became even more apparent. On stage, Anderson could trust Capps to adapt to any mood without hesitation. Their connection was almost telepathic. They didn't need to look at each other to move as one. During one famous televised Grand Ole Opry performance, Anderson's microphone briefly cut out. Instead of panicking, he stepped back and let Capps take a small instrumental break. It wasn't planned, but it became one of the most talked about moments of the show. It was a silent, powerful reminder that Capps was more than a supporting musician. He was the heartbeat of the music. For all the records they made together, some of the most defining moments of their friendship happened off the stage. Touring in the 1970s and 80s was a demanding grind of long drives, endless sound checks, and performances for fans who expected perfection every night. In those quiet stretches between cities, a different kind of music played, the rhythm of loyalty, laughter, and shared life. On the bus, while others rested, Jimmy was often the one sitting quietly, working through new chord voicings or offering support to a younger bandmate. Anderson later shared that the road could be lonely, even with a full crew, but with Jimmy around, he always felt understood. Their friendship was built on consistency and presence. They didn't need to talk about feelings. A shared look or a cup of coffee at a highway stop said everything. There's a legendary story from a Texas tour when the band's equipment truck broke down hours before a show. Tempers were flaring, and it looked like the performance would be canceled. But Capps, with his trademark.com, quietly pulled out his guitar, sat on a stool, and began to play. Anderson joined him, and soon the whole band was performing an impromptu acoustic set on the venue's front steps. The fans sat on the grass, clapping and swaying. It was a disaster turned into a memory, all because of Jimmy's steadying presence. Evenings off the stage were much the same. In small diners after shows, Capps was known for his gentle, perfectly timed humor that had the whole table laughing. Anderson once said he felt safer on stage when Jimmy was beside him. Not because he feared mistakes, but because Jimmy's presence made him feel that no matter what happened, it would be okay. It was June 1st, 2020, when the country music world felt a sudden and painful silence. Jimmy Capps, the gentle giant behind so many iconic songs, passed away at 81. For Bill Anderson, the news wasn't just sad, it was shattering. 5 decades of friendship, thousands of shared stages, and a lifetime of music vanished in the quiet passing of one man. Capps had played with nearly everyone who mattered in Nashville, from George Jones to Alan Jackson, but his quiet loyalty to Bill Anderson made their connection unique. Bill later admitted he didn't cry right away, not because he wasn't heartbroken, but because the loss was too big to process in a single moment. He confessed in an interview that he regretted not calling more often in Jimmy's final years, saying, "I assumed we had more time. I think we all do." The grief was palpable. The Grand Ole Opry, in a touching tribute, renamed Dressing Room Number 6, where Jimmy had tuned his guitar and encouraged countless young musicians, the Jimmy Capps Music Room. It was the first time the Opry had honored a musician in this way. When Anderson was invited to speak at the dedication, he almost declined, saying he wasn't sure he could get through it without losing it. But he did show up, and in that room, he didn't give a formal speech. Instead, he told a story about Jimmy's quiet discipline and said, that's who Jimmy was. He didn't need to talk. He just needed to be there. On stage, Bill Anderson and Jimmy Capps shared more than music. They shared the raw, unscripted moments of their lives. These weren't about chart positions or awards. They were about heartbreak and loneliness, and how two men found comfort in each other's steady presence. In the early 1990s, when Anderson was going through a draining divorce, his spark began to dim. It was Jimmy who noticed first. Without asking a single question, he simply handed Anderson a cup of coffee and sat beside him in silence. It was enough. That small, quiet act broke the wall. And Anderson later said it was the first time he had allowed himself to truly cry in months. Years later, it was Anderson's turn to stand beside Jimmy after Capps lost his first wife, Anne. He didn't speak at the funeral or posted tribute. He just showed up the next morning with breakfast and 2 lawn chairs, and they sat in the backyard for hours without saying much. Sometimes healing doesn't come from answers. It comes from being seen. What bound these two men together was an emotional understanding forged in silence. Both were private, and both had lived through the kinds of wounds that fame can't protect. You, from On stage, the crowd saw perfection. But beneath the lights were two men who had carried each other through life's most painful chapters. Even today, Anderson admits there are things about Jimmy he'll never share publicly. Not because he's withholding them, but because they are sacred. Jimmy's humility was legendary. So, when he was inducted into the Musicians Hall of Fame in 2014, the honor felt both deserved and painfully overdue. Capps accepted the award with grace. But his speech was short and focused on the joy of making music with good people, not on himself. Bill Anderson sat in the audience, beaming with pride, but later confessed that what struck him most was the look in Jimmy's eyes, a mix of pride and embarrassment, as if he would have preferred to be back in the studio. But the real tribute came after his passing. The naming of the Jimmy Capps Music Room at the Opry was a quiet, powerful acknowledgement of his legacy. Inside that room, there is a small drawer with a single guitar pick, placed there by an anonymous musician. No one touches it. Anderson still visits the room before certain performances, sometimes just placing his hand over the drawer. He says it helps him feel ready. In an interview, Anderson shared the most poignant detail of all. "There are nights when I look over my shoulder on stage and for a second, I still expect to see him there. Just off to the side, half in the dark, tuning up and waiting." The silence Jimmy left behind is louder than any applause. When Bill Anderson finally spoke about Jimmy Capps after his passing, it was during a raw, unscripted radio interview. His voice, usually so composed, cracked with emotion. "You don't just miss the music," Anderson said, "you miss the silence between the notes." He told a story he had never shared before. After Jimmy's death, he was back in the studio working on a song they had started. During playback, the engineer heard a faint, gentle guitar strumming, mistakably Jimmy's style. "I like to think he came by," Anderson said softly, "just one more time." He never wrote a tribute song, not because he couldn't, but because he believed the best goodbye was silence. The tribute for him is a private notebook he calls the Book of Capps, filled with small memories that only the two of them knew. "I never got to say everything," Anderson admitted, "but I hope he knows." His final words lingered. "You don't just lose people like Jimmy. You learn to carry them differently." And in every pause, every quiet space in Bill Anderson's music, Jimmy still plays.